Hello, hi.
Hi, Daanish.
You can hear me. I'm
Good
so sorry
evening.
my
No,
house, realizing that it's not working. What I should have done is run out earlier instead of trying to fix the internet. And then no taxi, and then into the tube, and then run, and anyway.
I'm really sorry that you had to go through all of that. I
Fine.
just
So
received a
sorry
word from Marjabin.
we had all of this excitement. So my apologies for that. Okay.
But it's totally fine. We take a breather, and I think sometimes these things make for a more exciting webinar as well. Because we have so many webinars. I think some webinar with drama is good.
I think that one of the perils, and this reminds me a little bit about colonial thinking. As a colonial subject, I expect things to work in London. I don't expect them to work in Rawalpindi. So I will do 16 different backups in Rawalpindi to make sure that I'm able to do the seminar. Whereas in London, it's like, oh yeah, of course it's going to be working, and then it's not working. And then suddenly crashing down. I think that's a nice little metaphor to start with regard to water. Our certainties
I
about
so completely,
meters, our certainties about dams, our certainties about water development.
so completely agree.
Okay.
Okay, so Danish, over to Dr. Mahesh. He will be facilitating today's meeting. Mahesh, are you there? Marjabin, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. I'm waiting for Mahesh.
I'm audible. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe he was waiting and got engaged with something else. Let me call him. Give me just 30 seconds. Yeah.
I think he's got 5 minutes before he has to.
No, it's
Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
Hi,
Hi, Mahesh.
how are you?
Audible.
Hi. I am good. I'm good. Shreya, you joined. Good.
I'm joining, but I'm going to listen in today. My network is also, I'm sitting in the mountains traveling. It's a mess here as well. So I'm listening in, but I'm here to help out with any of the facilitation, Mahesh, at any point.
Good. And
Over to you.
yeah, let's wait 5 minutes because we gave 30 minutes time.
Okay, great. Let me get some more water then. I'll need that.
You might need a coffee, actually.
That's no time for that.
Yeah, people are joining, so it's good.
Sorry, Mahesh, today my entire travel plan has been a mess. There is a curfew in near the Sudhampur Jammu area. It's
Oh,
just really
okay.
early. It's all it's all khichdi right now. There's a G20 meeting thing happening, and we kept it in Jammu, so everything is.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, it's a lot of security. Yeah, okay, I can understand.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like in South Asia, we are sort of attendants for foreign visitors, provide the background. The way the
Yeah,
states
and
for foreigners than it does for us.
in the most sensitive, unstable areas where it's been a complete mess in this region for the last 1 month. Okay, Mahesh, I think Marjabin, should we start or should we wait another like 3 minutes and start it?
Let's wait 3 minutes more because we gave 30 minutes time, so we should be now
No,
allow to everybody to come on.
okay, I think Tim has written, I'm in, please start. Okay. Let me just write to everybody.
So in meantime, I would request Professor Daanish to open your, presentation and try to screen that, share it. Everything is fine, hopefully.
Sure. Full screen. You see it?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay, good. I don't know what happened last time. I mean, I do these all the time, and then last time just nothing would work. It's just so.
I mean, I think like after a point you stop feeling like it's a mess and just sort of enjoy the chaos. Like I said, go with it.
Also,
We've learned how to go with the chaos.
exactly.
Yes, I think your screen, yeah, your screen is showing. So Mahesh, I think we are now on
Okay.
time. I think we can start. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so first of all, it's extremely sorry to all participants because there was some technical issue and that arises suddenly. It was beyond the control. So we delayed 30 minutes. For that, extremely sorry from our side that we will be late. Good afternoon to everybody. And today's we are, that having
Try to turn on your camera.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. So today we are having our series that we initiated for webinar for TAFSSA. First, I would like to say about TAFSSA to everybody again. Everybody aware of that, but still that TAFSSA is initiative of one CGIAR working in South Asia to aiming to deliver a coordinated program of research and engagement across food production to consumption continuum to support health diets and diversified diets for improve farmer livelihoods and resilience and conserve land, air, and water, groundwater resources. In this series of seminar, this is our 5th seminar, and for that, under TAFSSA initiative, that today's we have taken a historical, political, economic, and structural lenses for understanding present challenges of the agri-food systems and environmental change. Today's presentation on decolonizing water, viewing the 2022 Pakistan floods. Hope everybody aware about that. It was a mess in the colonial present, and will throw light on the importance of these lenses in diagnosing the problems and its very roots, and is seeking alternative pathways and directions for future policy. It is my great honor today to welcome and introduce Dr. Professor Daanish Mustafa, and it's really my great privilege that Dr. Daanish has all academic qualifications from US, considering from he's obtained BA from Geography to Melbury College, USA, to Master from Hawaii, Manoa, to PhD from University of Colorado. He has a strong background, and after that, he taught in Manson University in Fairfax, and then followed. He was engaged in Florida, St. Petersburg, in university, and his intellectual on to Department of Geography. Whilst his research has been funded by many international donors like IDRC, DFID, Natural Environmental Research and Council, National Geographic Society, Royal Geographic Society, and British Academy, so on so. Dr. Daanish was, very key person and co-author in climate change responses and strategies for Pakistan, in addition to being a lead author in United Nations Development Program, UNDP, and then IOM, International Organization of Migrations, so and so. Now, Dr. Daanish is associated with and working with directly King's College of London in especially area of critical geography. Dr. Daanish, experience in research and his interest in like critical water resource geographies, environmental hazards and climate risks, critical geographies of violence and terror, and problematizing environment and development impact. So and Dr. Daanish have a excellence awards in teaching in both King's University in critical policy and geography, as well as in US in same area. So it is really great pleasure to all of us having and today to as a resource person, Dr. Daanish. So Dr. Daanish, thank you very much for agreeing and welcome. And it is our great pleasure to listen to you. In meantime, after, during presentation, please put your questions and any comments in questions and answer, or you can put it also in chat box. So we can address, so this is 35 minutes around Dr. Daanish will present, and then later we will have a 10 minutes questions answer. So thank you, Dr. Daanish, floors to you, and please, over to you. Please also make in your presentation in presentation mode, that would be good.
Okay. I shall do that. Thank you so much for that very generous introduction, Dr. Gatala. I was just mentioning to Shiria, that I woke up this morning, and if I were in Rawalpindi, I would expect the internet to possibly not work. But here in London, like a good colonial subject, I expect everything to work, and then turns out that it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, the whole world comes crashing down. When it doesn't work in Pakistan, I am okay with it because I expect it not to work. And I think that that's a nice little metaphor or a vignette to start this particular meeting with, where there are certainties that we associate with certain ways of thinking about water, metrics about water quality, metrics about water flows, metrics about water use, what we need to do about it. And I think that my presentation today is going to be about questioning some of those some of those certainties and destabilizing them and thinking about a different way forward, because clearly what has been hasn't worked. And I'll make the case to you that it hasn't worked. And I know all the tropes that are given. Oh my God, if it weren't for Green Revolution. Oh my God, if it weren't for the Indus irrigation system. Oh my God, if it weren't for modern water, we would have had famines, we would have death, we would have disease. I'll be happy to answer questions along those lines. Hear me out. So, like most of the times, I tend to address any sort of presentation regarding climate change with these 4 conceptual approaches to climate change, which I think would be useful for us to be familiar with. There is, this came out in 1991 in the first volume of Global Environmental Change, which is about the most high impact journal within academia today, almost going on 30 years, 30 years. It's the most high impact journal. And this came out in the first assessment, volume of it, where Jim Westcott, my mentor, said that how do we know about climate change? How do we know that there is climate change? And the way we know it is, the modern dominant scientific way of knowing it is that the climate scenario assessment. There are these very clever people at the Tyndall Center for Atmospheric Research. There are some very clever people at National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. There's some very clever people at GFDL laboratories. And they've got these big computers which go round and round and round, and out come certain climate scenario assessments based upon high science of climate, which tell us that we're going to be in very serious trouble if carbon emissions continue to be the accumulation of carbon within the atmosphere and greenhouse gases within the atmosphere continue to increase. We know that story. We buy that story here in United Kingdom. I think we also buy that story in ISIGON. We buy that story in IWR. We buy that story in the hallowed corridors of high policy science and research. I believe in that story. I buy that story because many of my colleagues are part of that story, are part of the fabricators and makers of that story. Climate science was something that I practically intellectually grew up with at University of Colorado, with NCAR there, with many other researchers. But then I found a wee bit of a disconnect because for the first time when I worked on climate change in early 90s, 91, 92, I typically go in with a delegation from the United States or the European Union or other these places and walk into a Secretary Environment's office or Secretary Urban Affairs office, and we say, we're very concerned about climate change. We need to think about adaptation. In the context of Pakistan, we also need to think about mitigation. We need to take this seriously. They're like, yes, 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 we're very, very interested. This is very important. We definitely need to do that. And I have a wee bit of an insider and outsider persona when it comes to international high science or policy, because on the one hand, I'm an academic based out of the West, but on the other hand, I'm also a wee bit of a Desi who actually hails from Pakistan and South Asia. So there's a bit of a familiarity there. As soon as the Westerners would be out of the picture or some out of earshot, they would turn around and say, what are these people smoking? What is it that they're smoking? Why aren't they sharing what they're smoking? Like, have they even looked around what's going on in the global South? Have they seen the level of deprivation, hunger, poverty, injustice, environmental degradation, pollution? The list just goes on, and the sheer human misery, which is the present, which is the unbearable present for millions of people, billions of people globally. And they want me to worry about something that's going to happen 50 years from now, or 100 years from now, or 30 years from now. For me, the time step is 5 seconds, or 10 seconds, or day, or 5 days, or 20 days, within which I need to address unfolding crisis perpetually. And Jim Westcott very rightly argues that maybe one of the ways of thinking about, instead of divorcing contemporary present vulnerability, present problems from future climate challenges, is perhaps a mistake. And in fact, relatively recently, we have turned around to that, warmed up to that particular concept. That there is no climate change future, it's a climate change present. We are in it. It's not going to happen in the future. So what we need to do is to attend to vulnerabilities and contemporary water problems today. No matter what happens, I think a lot of people in the global North would like to believe that they're going to be okay. I mean, last night I was at this Point of Science thing that we have for general audiences, and our students and staff basically give a presentation to a lay audience about what climate science means. And one of the questions asked was, well, why is there such cavalier attitude in the global North on part of the European Union or North America and what have you, regarding the Conference of Parties process and regarding mitigating, pulling back on carbon emissions? And one of the answers that came out was that maybe the global North believes that it's going to be okay. It can manage. Netherlands is going to manage somehow. It's not going to yield a square inch of its territory to the sea, and they are going to put in as much money and engineering as need be in order to keep the sea at bay. So maybe with that quiet confidence, they're just continuing business as usual, thinking they're going to be okay and someone else is going to pay for it. But the message of the contemporary water management problems is that even if we were to ignore climate change altogether, for example, as a challenge, and that's something that I kind of learned as well, that the things that you need to do to mitigate against climate change is something that you should have been doing anyway. Pro-carbon development is exclusive of women. Pro-carbon development is exclusive of poor people. Pro-carbon development is exploitive of the environment. Pro-carbon development or carbon-intensive development is destructive of water resources. We know all of those stories. Climate change or no climate change, the destruction wrought by carbon-intensive development, we know very well about. So the idea is that focusing on the present, here and now, and keeping equity, interclass equity, interspecies equity, into sharp focus, might be another way of managing the challenges that climate change is going to throw. The third thing that Jim Westcott argued was that maybe we need to think about historical antecedents and analogies. We've had floods in the past, we've had droughts in the past, we've had heat waves in the past, we have a lot of repository of knowledge from historical experience of how societies have managed and coped with extreme events. Maybe the insight to future challenges is in the past, and learning from the past in order not to repeat those mistakes might be the way forward. That's also a fruitful sort of a way of thinking about climate change. And ultimately, he argues that there is a foundational political cultural reconstruction, which is essentially saying, I'm sure everyone has heard within their own context, every society has a certain moral gyroscope, an ethical gyroscope, whether it is religiously derived, whether it is experientially derived, whether it is rationally derived or scientifically derived. It's always a hybrid sort of origins of all of those ethical, moral, behavioral principles that every society subscribes to. And if one were to say that climate change is happening, or the challenges of climate change are happening because we are wicked, because we are greedy, because we do not have respect for other human beings, because we do not have respect for the non-human world. Now, all of these terms, on the one hand, we scientifically trained people would say, oh my God, what is this old wives' tale and old people's tale that you're telling us? This is science. We do not involve ethics or morality or culture in there. But isn't it true? Isn't climate change an outcome of the fact that we are a very greedy, acquisitive society? Isn't climate change an outcome of the fact that we take the rest of the non-human world as for granted, that we want to dominate it, that we want to exploit as much out of it, and the fruits of that exploitation accumulate to a smaller and smaller group of people? And for heaven's sakes, today, if in India, Bill Gates and some of the richest people are held up as the most admired human beings by a vast majority of the population, then you could say that there is something has gone fundamentally wrong there. That level of sickening consumption and power and accumulation of wealth is somehow a desirable trait. So maybe what we are really thinking about is revisiting those fundamental ethical principles and thinking about, in other words, we practically have to produce ourselves differently. Climate change is not something outside of us, it's inside of us. The causes of it are inside of us. And the global corporations and the people in power would like you to believe that it is your behavior that's going to change. And everyone tries to change their behavior, and then they fail repeatedly, and then they become frustrated, and then they become depressed. But what if I were to tell you that none of us ever behave, none of us ever engage in behavior? All of us actually engage in social practice. We are all engaging in a certain social practice. If my uncle once used to say that, what if I buy a car and park it in the mohalla, and no one else in my mohalla can afford a car, and if they look at that car, what are they going to say? What bad manners would it be? What poor taste would it be? What kind of a human being I would be if I were to buy a car which I can afford to buy and park it in a place where no one else can afford to buy it? To him, that was the ultimate social faux pas. Now, today, we know that in South Asia, no one has any such problem. Everyone is more than happy to buy a bigger and bigger car and park it wherever most people can look at it and say, oh my God, I can't afford it, this person can. So maybe that foundational political cultural reconstruction is the way forward for us to change society in ways such that it can negotiate and mitigate against the kind of climatic disasters that we are facing. So towards that end, one of the things in reference to the fourth point is also about what I'm going to talk to you about today, about decolonizing knowledge. Decolonizing knowledge might be part of that foundational political cultural reconstruction. Now, I'm not going to read through this because I'm sure everyone can read English and it's readable to everyone. My argument is that there are many, many ways of knowing the world. What is the Indus? It's drainage for a certain square kilometers of land. It's an ecosystem. It's a living being. It's divine. It's a god. It's a divine entity. What is a forest? It's a billion board feet of timber, certain square kilometers of land. It's an ecosystem. It's where demons and ghouls and jinns live. It's a place, it's an abode of gods. How you answer that question is not separate from what you do to that. And how we have answered the question under the colonial knowledge system about what is the Indus, what is the Ganges. On the one hand, yes, Ganges is sacred. But on the other hand, we know, yeah, it's kind of sacred, all right, fine, we will do all the rituals and everything else. But in terms of our functional societal social practice, hydrosocial practice of engaging with the Ganges is deeply colonial in nature. And hence the sorts of issues of pollution, diversion, access to water present themselves. So my submission is I teach this module in environmental thought. And I start the story at 200,000 BC. And start thinking about what were the Paleolithic conceptions for human beings up to about 10,000 years ago, the early Neolithic period, at the end of the late Paleolithic, early Neolithic period. I think we could all agree that any human being 50,000 years ago who was born on this planet had the same hardware as we do, had the same neural density as we do. If the principles of evolution are correct, if you're buying into the science of it, the reality is that people 100 years ago were not stupid. People 10,000 years ago were not stupider than us. Or people 50,000 years ago had the same neural network. They just thought about the world in very different ways. And when you recognize that particular insight, you suddenly recognize, well, in fact, today people think in very different ways about the world. And they're not because they're stupider than us, it's just they think differently. So the vastness of human experience is absolutely amazing. And what have we done? What we have said is that vastness of human experience temporally and spatially is irrelevant. And there's one way of thinking about the world. I think that's the problem. I think that's a huge problem. So what would decolonizing water mean in that context? When I came to King's, my HOD said that you have to teach multivariate statistics. Now, I was trained in multivariate statistics, but I was never comfortable enough to actually teach it. And teaching it in front of 120 undergraduates, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. And those of you who've ever taught in a classroom know that when you are insecure about something that you're going to teach, you kind of over-prepare for it. Like you have to teach yourself like what you're going to teach, and then you go out there and teach other people, and then you think about all the nightmare scenarios where they're going to ask you a question, they're going to make fun of you, and you won't know what you're going to say. And I did precisely that. So as I was teaching the multivariate statistics, in one of the statistics book, I came across this word, this sentence, which said that average is the predictive model of the data. And I just thought about it, like, oh my God, that's so true. Average, the word average, mean, is a predictive model of the data, just as mode is a predictive model of the data, or median is a predictive model of the data, or any other model that you put on there. So if I were to say, what is the average age of people participating in this particular seminar? If assuming that it's a normal distribution of people, normal distribution of age, we can come up that average, because everyone knows that average doesn't mean anything outside of a normal distributed data. We'd be fairly certain that 64% of the people that we predict are going to be within the first standard deviation of this particular number, average age of the people participating in this seminar. Now, what I thought about was that, wow, that simple statistical model has literally sunk at the capillary levels of our culture and society. Every time I work with farmers in Pakistan or Nepal, and I ask them, what is your average production of productivity? And they're like, we have absolutely no idea what it is. But we know what a good year looks like and what a bad year looks like. And after considerable thinking, what I realized was that normality and average and mean is something that we modern people are very deeply committed to, or colonially trained people are very committed to. That what is the average outcome of something? What does a normal day look like? Whereas in human experience, all through history, and certainly human experience in our part of the world, in South Asia, is that there are good days and there are bad days. There's good years and bad years of productivity. And ultimately, the non-modern paradigm of planning seems to be, what is it the worst that can happen? And I'll still be standing. So ultimately, the way I say that many of the decolonial, indigenous, pre-colonial models of planning are how to plan inwards from extremes. Whereas practically all modern planning paradigms are contingent upon planning outwards from the mean. We want to get as much certainty about climate scenarios, future temperatures, future water flows, future precipitation, and then plan outwards from that. Now, this much we know, this is the uncertainty band, and now we plan around that. Whereas a decolonial way of thinking, perhaps, or a pre-colonial way of thinking had always been, what is the worst that can happen? And we plan inwards from that to make sure that we're still around if that bad thing happens. So the idea is to decenter normality, forget about average flows. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever to talk about average annual flows in the context of the Indus or any South Asian rivers. There's a particular story based upon European rivers that got transposed into the South Asian context. And we are so committed to it. Pakistan's interprovincial water accord is based upon 10-day running average of water flows in the rivers, based upon which the interprovincial distribution is going to take place. Right. And it creates so many problems, precisely because we are almost religiously committed to a certain way of thinking about the world. I don't need to move there. So the idea is we need to recenter vernacular experience of uncertainty. Uncertainty is not a bad thing. What is certain in life? Nothing is certain in life. And my God, does anyone want to live a certain life? In fact, I just lived huge amounts of uncertainty just this morning, trying to find an internet connection so that I could give this particular lecture, right? So that uncertainty, and I think Dr. Chakrabarti very rightly said, well, let's enjoy the chaos, why not? And I say, that might not be a bad idea in a decolonial sort of way, not necessarily chaos, but not trying to model away, assume away uncertainty, but rather to embrace it as a human condition, as a condition of life. Let's go with it. Dynamism, change, hazardousness. There are hazards out there that we need to think about. What is the extreme? What's the worst that can happen? And policy and practice about water would be my message. So what did colonial modern water do in 2022? The modern water, colonial water, as Jamie Linton very rightly asks, what is water? Well, you could ask that question and everyone would be like, you are really stupid, mate, if you're asking that question. What is water? Of course, everyone knows what water is. It's H2O, right? 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom make up water. Why do you have to ask these stupid questions? Except that H2O does not exist. Outside of the rarefied confines of a laboratory, H2O does not exist. As soon as it leaves the laboratory, it bonds with other things. It's a universal solvent. It becomes a compound, different compound with all sorts of impurities in it, mineral dissolved into it, pollutants dissolved into it, bacteria dissolved into it, microbes dissolved into it. It becomes something different. Now, all of us experientially know that it is different. Yet we hold on to this scientific modern fiction of a unitary water. So which is why I am calling, following Jamie Linton, I'm calling that water modern water. So what has modern water done for us? You know, this thing, this water that we know about. We said that there is a certain average annual flow. Deviations from that average annual flow is inconvenient, is rude. It's really rude of the Indus to do that, or any of the rivers to do that. And what we try to do, having imposed our own certainty over the uncertainties and dynamism of the Indus, we try to engineer a way. all the sort of, well, really dynamism of the river. There's nothing wrong with floods. I think that floods as a hazard have only become a hazard in the past 150 years or so. Our societies would not exist without the rhythm of the rivers, well, the rhythm of the floods, and floods were always welcome. Flood season, where the water slowly came up and spread out over the floodplain and rejuvenated the water, rejuvenated the land, increased the productivity of the land, led to a whole set of cultural festivals and engagement with the water in a more sort of in a different sort of a register than the rest of the year. It was never really a hazard if you think about it. And if the river is allowed to flow within its floodplain, it doesn't really cause any damage. A lot of it gets stored out in the wetlands. A lot of it, low intensity floods kind of come out, and cool things happen. Only 150 years ago, we figured that floods are a problem and they need to be fought. And then turns out that every time you try to fight floods, you lose, but we fight them anyway. So we keep fighting them, we keep losing, we keep fighting them, we keep losing. That's the paradigm, that's the gift that colonial water has given us. So what did we do? We said, oh, the colonials told us, oh, wetlands are disease-infested, bad places. So wetlands need to be drained. They also have crocodiles. Crocodiles bite people, so bad. Get rid of those. The mosquitoes, bad. Get rid of those. So you interrupted the natural drainage of the water. You encourage inappropriate floodplain use by putting in levees, encouraging people to settle, allotted people land in the floodplain where they're likely to get hurt much worse. And the remarkable thing was that they had built all of these levees to prevent against riverine flooding. But in southern Pakistan, all the precipitation happened in the floodplain. And now that the water wanted to get back into the river, you had built all of these levees to prevent water to come out of the river to flood the floodplain. Instead, the floodplain is flooding, and now it wants to get back into the river to drain away because it was not a riverine flood as such. It could not get back in. Hence, 5-6 months of inundation, deep inundation within the floodplain. It led to the sweeping of 30 dams in 2022, which, although I'm very sorry that a poor country lost so much of its infrastructure as a result of those floods, sadly, I don't lament it. And turns out, all the water engineers like, what kind of a flood is this that at the end of it, both of our reservoirs are empty? New sort of configuration of precipitation and flood waves. The biggest thing at a premium in terms of flood management you can do is to facilitate drainage. And the drainage is a disaster in the Indus River system. Every time every local child knows which way the river flows, which way the drainage is. But everywhere it wants to drain away, there is a railroad track with a berm in it, which serves as a dam. There's a road which serves as which is a berm, has a elevated road, which serves as a dam. There is a canal, which also has a berm, which serves as a dam to make sure that the drainage doesn't happen. And then there are the levees all along the river that would not let the water drain out. Again, the same sort of story, that we accentuated the floods, we created the floods practically by our own interventions. So with modern water, what we have done is we have exchanged high frequency, low intensity flood events for low frequency, high intensity events through the colonial engineering paradigm. I'd be happy to explain the exact mechanics of it if anyone has questions, but I'm sure there are a lot of engineers in there who know exactly how that actually plays out. So, as I said, that modern water may be a singular entity. But experientially, we know that there's a world of a difference between water that is in the toilet bowl and that's coming out of the tap. Culturally, we know that there's a difference between water that is well, actually, there isn't really, at least certainly not in the United Kingdom, that there's a difference between the kitchen sink water and the lavatory sink water. But we make those sorts of distinctions. We make distinctions between pure water, impure water, water for recreation, water for life, so on and so forth. I would say that there are multiple layers of meaning that every society, every culture, differentiated by gender, age, spiritual belief system, on water. And I would argue that we need to recenter and integrate those multiple layers of meaning. And if we do that, we're going to have to move beyond obsession with dams and mega infrastructure projects. Mega infrastructure projects are the ultimate manifestation of colonial thinking in water. So what would decolonized flood management mean? Not flood fighting, you'd never fight floods. What would decolonized flood management look like? In the first instance, credible, practical, comprehensive early warning. Now, turns out I was in Badin district of southern Pakistan, and this assistant commissioner, he told me that in 2011 he got a fax, and they still use faxes in the government of Pakistan. So he received a fax that's saying that there is a 75% chance of 150 millimeters of rain in the next 48 hours. Now, many of you are meteorologists, perhaps engineers, scientifically trained. What does that mean to you? And my sense is that for most of you, well, if it's happening in Assam, that means very little. But if it's happening in Rajasthan, that means a lot. But even then, I just really don't know what to do about it. And if you're a little confused, promise you that the assistant commissioner was confused as well. And he just basically ignored it. And in 2011, you had some of the worst inundation and floods in the Badin district in southern Pakistan in living memory. So the idea is that when you give out these scientific meteorology department gives out in the next 24 hours this many millimeters, what does a millimeter of rain really mean experientially? So in the first instance, it has to be through participatory data collection. There are 80 meteorological Met stations in Pakistan, because every time the Met department needs to have because it's under the Ministry of Defense, so every time they need to set up a Met office, they need to hire a Naib Qasir, the assistant director, deputy director, director, appropriate land, appropriate equipment, and what have you, and set up an office. There are 80 of them in that country. Now, I believe that you can get a 10-pound Amazon weather kit from Amazon and set it up. Why aren't there weather stations over every school and high school in the country? What does it take to do that? In Nepal, there are 236, I understand. Why don't we have participatory data collection, train children, especially young girls and women, and draw upon experiential meteorology? Everyone is a meteorologist in South Asia, particularly in the rural South Asia, because they have to be. So think about that experiential meteorology, integrate into the overall warning system and weather assessment system. Give some respect to that is experiential knowledge. Actionable vulnerability assessments. Your revenue departments for the past 150, 200 years have been undertaking land revenue assessments. Now, very little of the revenue stream for the governments in South Asia come from land revenue assessments. So the Patwaris are there, but the Patwaris, whatever they're assessing in terms of land productivity, has very little meaning in terms of actual revenues to the state. Why can't they be repurposed? Because it might be a good idea to have some sort of reforms in a bureaucracy every 150 to 200 years or so, maybe change a few things. And there I'm suggesting that maybe vulnerability assessments, that maybe your Patwari can actually do vulnerability assessments and feed in that data to the state, and gender inclusive vulnerability assessments, gender differentiated vulnerability assessments, which can be the basis for action in the aftermath of extreme events. And comprehensibility, there's credible by virtue of the fact that people themselves have collected the data so they know about it, actionable because they're vulnerability assessments and gender inclusive, and comprehensibility where you go for jargon-free in local languages. Most of the times in rural South Asia, women do not speak the national language, they speak the local language. Why can't we have those sorts of warnings which are understandable in those languages? Again, draw upon that knowledge to get rid of obstructions in natural drainage. There's a real estate boom going on. I mean, certainly in Pakistan, military red and otherwise, there's a massive real estate infrastructure, non-productive investments going on. Suggestion is restore wetlands and prevent any kind of these gated community, automobile dependent, high concrete kinds of real estate developments in the floodplains. Undertake vulnerability mapping, I've already talked about it, and work with local adjustments to flood. I know for a fact that in rural Punjab, used to be in a community, you'd always build a house in a floodplain on a platform, on a pedestal, about 5-6 feet high platform, expecting the floods to be there and knowing that at least your immediate food, family, and otherwise will be safe in that particular context, and the flood will drain away. So work with those sorts of adjustments. So decolonized flood management would also mean decentralize and devolve governance to the local level. We still live in very highly centralized kinds of states all over South Asia, I would argue. South, local level knowledge, local level adjustments. Prioritize women, gender minorities, and marginalized communities for relief aid. It seems to be quite the opposite, the reality of distribution of relief aid in the context of country. I've always argued in the context of Pakistan, and this is a bit of a Pakistan-centric kind of a thing. Do they have geography in India at the high school level? Do they teach physical geography or human geography?
Yes.
There is, yes, at some point.
Some parts or universally, nationally?
No, universities right up to master's or PhD levels.
No, I mean primary and secondary school.
In primary schools, yes, there are some
schools,
courses
yes.
of geography.
Okay. In Pakistan, they got rid of geography in the early 1980s, and they came in with this idea of Pakistan studies, which the point of that was to make us into patriotic Pakistani citizens. We haven't become much patriotic citizens, only just more ignorant ones, really stupid and ignorant citizens. So reintroduction of geography-like disciplines and environmental sciences kinds of disciplines, I would argue, to be honest with you, from primary, secondary school level, because vast majority of the students end up getting primary, secondary school level education. And we need to have that sort of a fundamental understanding, because I certainly started learning my geography in 3rd grade, if you will, 3rd and 4th grade. I think I'm the last of the generation of Pakistanis who actually had any exposure to geography in the primary and secondary school. I think we need to reintroduce that. I think we also need to move beyond a single hazard kind of a thinking and think about hazard cascades and compound hazards. And I think much of the experiential interaction with hazards is along those lines. And ultimately, the idea is find some new textbooks not written by dead white men. Ultimately, maybe I've put in about Pakistan, but maybe what I should have done is also say people of Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, or Afghanistan, or Iran, or wherever it is that you want to talk about. Have some faith. They own their land and water and are the greatest custodians and scholars of it. And they are scholars. I am absolutely stupefied every time I talk to a farmer in terms of how much they know about their local environment and the sort of hydrological processes, geomorphological processes of it, the soil formation processes of it. Amazing. Benefit from their news. And all you need is some humility and deprogramming of the colonial mindset. And humility, I often say we Pakistanis are people of many virtues. Sadly, humility is not one of them, especially if we've had an English medium education and that sort of thing. I don't know how far that's true of South Asia overall, but I know for a fact that at least in our case, when you talk about the irrigation department and you talk about Water and Power Development Authority, humility doesn't come easily into them, intellectual humility. And I think that it's that intellectual humility that we really need. I say it's not a choice. I think it's the only hope in a climate change present. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daanish. It is really very informal, informative and, very knowledgeable presentation that you presented. There are questions in chat box. Majavan, you would like to take those questions and to read out that, or Dr. Daanish can go. It's in chat box. There are, 4-5 questions.
Mahesh, if it's okay, I can take my question.
Yeah, please.
On the mic. So Daanish, thanks a lot. Like I said, decolonized science is not a very popular theme of work when you look at very scientific institutions, which are, where the foundations are on, a lot of physical sciences, etc. So my question was that, given that the teaching of science, what is considered as good science, the foundations of what is considered a scientific method itself is so colonized, who is going to be involved in the process of decolonizing science when scientists themselves are trained in increasingly colonized methods? And especially given the fact that now we work more and more in interdisciplinary systems, where you would be talking across disciplines, and sometimes it almost feels like it doesn't feel like you're talking to each other. It feels like you're talking to a wall, because the very foundational philosophies of different disciplines come from such different spaces that you almost end up countering each other rather than contributing to one another. So how is this sort of decolonized science practiced in institutions of science and in doing science, was my question. Yeah.
I think that, thank you so much for that. And it's probably the hardest question you could have possibly asked. So thanks. Let's start with that and then go on to easier ones. I think that it would be counterproductive, not very useful, if we think of it as a tidy process, as a unidirectional tidy process of decolonizing and revealing a decolonized world onto bring it out. I think that it starts with precisely these sorts of uncomfortable conversations. It starts with precisely these sorts of, I give people an example. If you had come to London in 60 years ago, and you'd asked everyone, do you think, I think a random person walking, do you think all humans are created equal? As in brown folks, black people, and white people are equal? My guess is that 95% would have said, no, of course not. Obviously, white people are superior, brown people are next in line, and black people are next in line. They are races and racial superiority. And very few people actually realize how deeply intertwined the whole idea of race was within this whole colonial and scientific project. Right? Now, if you were to ask the same question 50, 60 years later, hey guys, do you think everyone is equal? And my guess is that 95% would say that of course everyone is equal. Maybe 60% would actually believe it. 30, 40% would still say that, that's really not true, but I can't really say that. Right? Now, what happened between those two times was a different structure of conversation, a structure of feeling. If you're looking for someone with a cape and running in there to decolonize science, that's just not going to happen. It's not going to be me. It's not going to be you. It's not going to be one person. It's not going to be 4 or 5 of us either. It's going to be about having these sorts of conversations and repeating these conversations over and over and over again. I keep saying that 20 years ago, when I would talk in the water sector of Pakistan, people would be like, no, we're not even listening to you. Who are you? You're not even an engineer. You don't even work for water. You don't even work for irrigation department. We're not listening to you. Get out. You stop. Nonsense. We're not hearing. Yeah. Today, I'm happy to report that I am universally deeply disliked in the water sector of Pakistan. Now, from complete indifference towards me to a deep dislike of me is a long distance that I have traveled in 20 years. And that distance is that finally I'm being heard. And they don't like what I'm saying, but at least they're hearing what I'm saying. And that is huge progress to my mind. So equally, I think at this stage, decolonization, go to University of Engineering and Technology, they've never heard of the term, right? Go to any of the IITs, most likely they're like, whatever, I've not heard of it. It's just something, another mumbo jumbo these liberal types have come up with to waste our time. That's what they would say at this time. Maybe 10 years from now, they would really hate this term, not like it, but at least they will have registered what it is. I wish that it didn't have to be that long, because we don't have that long. But the only way I see it is precisely having these sorts of conversations over and over and over again at the expense of sounding like a broken record, but I don't see any other way.
Thank you. I think we do need a theory of chaos now. I'll actually put that in the comment that, entropy and asymmetry is so natural in the physical world. There's a whole, in physics, you've got a theory of entropy. And somehow in social life, chaos is not permitted. It's considered informality, almost like formal is the ideal and a lack of it is what you get left with. So chaos is not considered as inherent to social life, unlike in the physical world. So yeah,
But
not a question, just throwing it out.
there's an excellent question over here. What initiative should we start first for changing the policymakers' attitude? Forget about their attitudes. How about doing something which you can do? I just talked about. Hey guys, what does it take for you to install a weather station? Find yourself a bucket, throw a little foot ruler in there. It's a rain gauge, right? You can find someone's sock, cut it up, and it's a windsock. You can easily make a little windmill to figure out what the wind speed is. You can do those things. And if you open up meteorological data collection to a wider populace, automatically, I promise you, there will be a change in culture. If you have to deal with people, you have to deal with children, you have to deal with school teachers, suddenly you have to step down below your pedestal. There are these specific points of reference and leverage, which are doable, which are cheap. And through those very actions, in terms of managing those actions, you end up deprogramming, because you have to deprogram. As soon as you step outside of the Pakistani or the Indian bureaucracy, a bureaucrat will have to deprogram and deal with it. So my submission is that maybe that's the way forward.
Yeah, thank you. The next question is asked by Arifur Rahman. He asks, how we will motivate the Bangladeshi people to prevent real estate in flood plan? As he mentioned that Bangladesh is a highly population.
Now you see, Bangladesh is an interesting example. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, how we will motivate the Bangladeshi people to prevent real estate in flood plan? Because he considering Bangladesh as a highly population city. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, I think we have to bear in mind in the first instance that when the British came to India, they first went to Bengal. And they went to Bengal because it was the richest part of the world, not just of India, of the world. It was the richest, right? It was still a delta back then.
Yeah, in terms of resources, yes, it's a richest part. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Production, output, everything. They went all around India and went to Bengal because that's where the money was. That was the Switzerland or the Luxembourg or of the New York or Cayman Islands of the time, right? And there was a reason it was still a delta, right? And relatively speaking, it had very high population densities. Why? Because there was productivity. Because Bengal, like most of Southeast Asia, was a water-based culture. People had rice growing, people had fish. I mean, the waterways of Bengal had enough in them, and they still do, to provide for the people. Except with the Zamindari system and the static land tenure system, you switched an altogether water-based society into a land-based society. The whole social engineering happened. So today, when you're talking about floodplain occupants is not a bad idea. There are ways of doing it, and it is in the Bengali culture or the Vietnamese culture or in the Thai culture or in the Burmese culture. In all of those cultures, they know how to live with the rivers. All you need to do is to revisit what you already know and live with the river, not against it. Floods, as I said, are not a bad thing. If it were not for floods, there will be no Bangladesh. There won't be no Bangladesh. Floods are a good thing. Floods are your friend. It's what you do that make them into an enemy. And I think that you must not prevent people from living in the floodplain, only make them live such that you can build houses on stilts, there are houseboats, there are all sorts of ways within the Bengali culture through which they have been friends with the rivers that they're living between for thousands of years. And why have the rivers become enemies today? Why is that a problem today? I think you know the answer.
Thank you. If anyone has any question, we have 2 minutes left for Q&A. If you can raise your hand and ask question directly, or we can go to the discussion. Yeah. Mahesh.
I don't know if it's none of asking then my questions to Dr. Daanish. Dr. Daanish, in South Asia especially, because this what we are talking about, decolonizing water and all floods and all, do you think that there is no coordination or completely lack of coordination between ministries and development activities and all? And that's one of the reason that we are having, biggest issue of these floods and all. Either we'll talk in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. So do you think that how that can be improved? It's not easy in bureaucracy kind of things and all, but that I think is one of the reason that we are facing all these challenges.
I think that's partially true. I mean, how could I possibly disagree with you? Obviously, that's true. But I give you an example. In Karachi in 2019, when there were massive floods in the city, I think 72 people died. Out of those 72 people, 53 people died from electrocution. And the remaining people died when their houses came crashing down. So when you think about a flood, you think about people drowning in it. No one drowned, not one person drowned. People either died of electrocution, which is the electricity department, poor electricity infrastructure, and the other remaining people died because their houses came crashing down, which is essentially a municipality building code violation. So sort of the question. In rural areas of South Asia, we find that the highest number of fatalities in the actual event of a flood are in fact from snake bites. Because people move to a higher ground, as do the snakes, and then snake-human-animal interactions happen, and then snakes bite, and we have some really lethal snakes in South Asia, like cobras and kraits and vipers and what have you. And the idea is, well, that's a question for the health department, right? I mean, basically, you want to have anti-venom available in a basic health unit. What you also need is anti-malarial drugs available in basic health units. You need to have anti-dysentery drugs available in the basic health units. So when you're talking about flooding, to take an example, an approach, a public health approach, or a multifaceted approach, which would inevitably involve multiple departments which are living in their own silos. We need to violate those silos. We need to break down those silos if we are going to deal with the actual experience of compounded and cascading hazards, which is we need to move away from single hazard kind of a thinking.
Mehzabin, would like to take if there are any question. If not, then we have to conclude.
I don't think we have any question more in the Q&A. So maybe you can go for conclusion.
No, I would prefer you should take, and then thanks to Dr. Daanish,
Yeah,
to
definitely.
yeah, please go ahead and
Thank you, Dr. Mahesh. It has been a nice discussion, and we finally did it.
Finally did it. Almost didn't, but we did it.
Yeah, what we will do, we will share with our border community, I mean, social media and all the channels, so that who missed the conversation due to the delay, they can also catch up with the discussion. And thank you so much. Yeah, thank you all the panelists, Shreya, Mahesh, for joining. Yeah, and hope to see you in our next webinar, 6th session. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And then this really gives it in depth that how local knowledge is really important, and it's we should not ignore indigenous and local knowledge and all. Thank you, Dr. Daanish, for really wonderful presentations and sparing time. And we'll keep in touch for future more, kind of development and connections as well. Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye, everybody. Bye bye.